Welcome back, and to give us his thoughts on the interview of President Aquino on the August 23rd hostage crisis, we're joined here in the studio by UST Political Science Professor Edmund Tayao. Prof, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much for having me.
And you heard the President give lengthy answers to many of the questions given. First of all, trying to explain why, in hindsight, he could have been on the ground, he could have taken a more active role. Do you agree that the President has, in some instances, need to micromanage situations, especially if it involves a crime?
Yes and no, Tony. First, let me say quickly that I commend the decision of the palace to face the media and answer questions, practically all kinds of questions coming from invited representatives from the media. So to a certain extent, as I've always maintained in previous discussions, the government also has to maintain its communication with the people. Other organizations have their propaganda. The government has to counter that so that at least the public will be informed what it is doing. Now, the question of whether he has to micromanage, I have to agree with what the President said, that at the end of the day, you will have to look at the proper offices and the proper personalities who actually should have acted. But then, of course, the part that would probably require his presence is that at least, first, he's a new president, at least there was an effort to show that he was on top of the situation and that there was proper coordination. Because right now, as I see it, the blame is always on the national government, on the police, but there are so many other stakeholders which are also present there. So again, he's right to say that more than just pinpoint as to who's at fault is to make way or efforts so that this can be prevented from happening again.
Could the President be more decisive in immediately pointing blame or assigning blame to people, because there's been a clamor for heads to roll? He said definitely when asked if heads will roll, but do you think he's taking too much time to do so?
Yes, it seems like that. For one thing, tama yung comment earlier, no? Like as far as Pag-asa is concerned. Yes, probably you couldn't probably compare the situation in Pag-asa that why Nilo was immediately sacked, no? But right now it's taking time. Probably the answer to that is this is more complicated because the situation in Pag-asa is that certainly there's a point person. Dito kasi there are so many different offices and the personalities that are and who are involved. So probably it's right to also wait for the result of the investigation. But initially, you could already see exactly as to who could have at least accepted the responsibility other than the President himself.
And when they asked about the DILG Secretary, our colleague Ted Failon asked the President if, well, in a joking manner, of course, if the President still had any pleasure in retaining Jesse Robredo on at the DILG. Do you think perhaps that the President conveyed actual sincerity in saying that he still sees a lot of pluses in keeping Jesse Robredo on at the DILG?
Yes, I think so. You see, for many organizations, including those doing development work, know the good secretary personally, no? Really clearly, as the President has been pointing out, there's an organizational problem here, no? And probably while he has not accepted specifically that organizationally he could have at least placed Robredo at least in a supervisory function as far as the police is concerned, and that it's not Undersecretary Puno, so that at least you can directly pinpoint that part of the responsibility would be that of Secretary Jess Robredo. But clearly, there's a long-term plan, no, on the part of the President, whether Secretary Jess' appointment is temporary or otherwise. The point is that there's clearly a long-term plan as far as the local governments are concerned. So probably he couldn't just say that just because of the clamor of the public that he can just give in. So it's also good to say that probably let's wait for the concrete results of the investigation.
But did you see the President's statement as a concrete gesture of support for Jesse Robredo and even for Undersecretary Rico Puno?
Not necessarily. The fact that recently, suddenly, the pronouncement is that the appointment of Secretary Jess is temporary is just saying that we're still keeping options open.
And what about Yusek Puno?
Yusek Puno is, to me, the most interesting part. As far as Secretary Jess' position is concerned, it's more clear, no, compared to the pronouncement made by the President as far as Undersecretary Puno is concerned. Although I get his point that the value of Undersecretary Puno in the DILG is that he knows the personalities there. So probably he couldn't find that any person who could fit the bill. But right now, Undersecretary Puno seems to still be useful, no? As far as the President's perspective is concerned.
Of course, people are questioning whether or not Yusek Puno, having been given direct supervision over the police operations, functioned as well as he was expected to do on the ground on August 23rd.
Alam mo kasi, it's really difficult to identify people clearly, no, in terms of who's going to handle what particular position. We have to also understand that it's just unfortunate that in the few months, in fact, within the 100 days of the President, this incident happened. I'd like to think that the current administration is still in the organizational or the transition stage. So, and suddenly you have this crisis to handle, and the people are still in transition. So you also have to consider that in terms of why some offices and some processes did not work. But again, it's also, yun ang mahirap eh. It's difficult to really weigh, no, whether to give in to the pressure or to the popular sentiment that there has to be someone to take responsibility. But at the end of the day, there are also reasons why there was a failure.
All right. Now we've had our own Vice President, Senior Vice President for News and Current Affairs, Maria Ressa, weighing in through an analysis that she wrote for the Wall Street Journal. And that's where she's saying that infighting has also somehow been detrimental to the way the President handled this particular crisis. Do you agree when President Aquino just sort of like brushed off the question on whether or not the factions in the palace are indeed hampering the work that they should be doing?
Definitely, it's very obvious, Tony. Alam mo, in all administrations and in all government, I should say in all organizations that is considerably big, there will definitely be factions. The only difference, whether or not the factions become significant or otherwise, is with leadership. So clearly, the President has to show that well, he has to really be forthcoming, no, in his instructions, in his pronouncements, no, and in his decisions. What's happening right now is that he probably is still trying to accommodate as much amount of points coming from the different groups. But at the end of the day, the decision will still be dependent on him. And that decision, once arrived at, he must really be strong to say, this is what we'll do, and this is the direction that we'll take. Hindi pwedeng, some will say, no, President, we might want to consider going this way. Hindi pwedeng ganon.
And do you see the President's actions, at least for the past 100 days, somehow pointing to a strong leadership, somebody who can listen to all sides and yet make his own decision and stand by that decision?
You know, absent this recent crisis, the direction is towards that good leadership. But this crisis has tested that kind of organizational capacity that the administration has so far prepared for. So this is not only a crisis, this should be a learning experience, and hopefully it's not only the right people will be placed in the right position, but there must also be structural or organizational changes that should be introduced.
All right, give us an idea. Maybe where should the President start with these organizational changes?
Well, let's start with the DILG. The DILG Secretary must clearly be the DILG Secretary. If you want to separate the function of the police, probably you change the administrative code and have another department handling police or internal affairs.
So in fact, what the President did, taking away that function from Jesse Robredo and giving it to an undersecretary, is totally against the administrative code.
Definitely. Because you know, by command responsibility, the reason why people are wanting Secretary Jess to leave the department, well, of course, other than, admittedly, of course, there are also some detractors of the good secretary, but also, other than that, you know, the secretary has command responsibility. He sits in the NAPOLCOM and, you know, clearly he is the one who serves directly at the pleasure of the president. Kaya nga ang tawag undersecretary. So the function is different from that of the secretary.
Well, in the entire interview with the president, there's a lot of, you know, recollection maybe that was done, and always using the word on hindsight, it could have been done this way or it could have been done that way. Now, maybe it's not good for a leader to always just have hindsight, but better to have foresight.
Definitely.
Do you see the president somehow displaying that ability to have foresight more than just hindsight?
You know, again, right now I would still suspend judgment. We're still in the first 100 days. The president is still busy, I'd like to think, planning. And again, it's still in the organizational stage. What this crisis has done is to awaken, some needed reforms that the president has to undertake along with the whole administration. Clearly, there has to be reforms from the procurement of materials used by the police, used by the armed forces, to the management structure, whether it's a sound policy to divide the function that supposedly falls under one office, and also to the relationship between the national government and the local government unit. You see, this particular angle has not yet been exhausted. The local government that is Manila also has to share with this responsibility, because the question is, why is the SAF not around? The president has clearly explained that the SAF was the one that was personally chosen by the president to take charge, but the SAF was nowhere near the site. The second, in the previous reports, it shows that supposedly there was a quote-unquote a real special weapons and tactics group in the Western Police District. But again, the real quote-unquote team wasn't there. So these particular questions have to be asked as well.
Yeah. Well, if you're saying that the organizational phase is still going on, and I think it was Paulo Bediones at one point of TV5 who also asked some appointments are being made maybe out of political indebtedness. And with organizational structures and revisions in the structure, will the political indebtedness coming out of the election campaign still be a factor, do you think, for the president?
It will always be a factor, Tony. For example, when the report as to who contributed to the campaign of the president, lumabas lahat yung pangalan doon. And most of the names that contributed to the campaign are now in the cabinet. Now, whether or not this is political indebtedness or something else, as the good president has explained in terms of having appointed the Secretary Abad, probably in the case of Secretary Abad, because of his experience, it shows that, yes, probably he's qualified. But the question is, other than the qualification, what other considerations fell in the choice of the president? So, political considerations definitely, or indebtedness, would be part of the equation. How much will it weigh as far as against the qualification is another question.
Exactly, because at this point, people are more interested in whether or not the officials the president may have chosen would be competent enough. It's an issue of competence, I think, that is at the core of this August 23rd issue.
Kasi katulad nito, marami, yun nga I mean, so many people would say, again, especially those that have been closely watching the development work, not only of the government, but also of civil society organizations. Of all the members of the cabinet, I'd like to think that Secretary Jess is one of the most popular, if not the most popular appointee.
Popular?
Yes.
Okay.
Question. Why is it that of all the cabinet members, it is Secretary Jess' appointment that had to suffer hesitations. Una pa lang, the President has already made the pronouncement. Temporarily, I am
the
DILG Secretary, concurrently. But even before that pronouncement, there was already a report that Secretary Jess was being considered.
Right.
Tapos biglang na-dilute yung option na yon. And then suddenly, Secretary Jess was appointed. With this crisis, suddenly his appointment is temporary. But there was no